2 years after burying my only daughter, I drove up the mountain to visit the villa I had sealed shut. The driveway should have been buried under 3 feet of pristine snow. The windows should have been dark, hollow eyes staring out at the Aspen wilderness. Instead, I found tire tracks, a roaring fire in the chimney, and a 4-year-old boy calling my grieving son-in-law Daddy. But when I turned up the volume on the hidden microphones in the server room, I heard the sentence that made my heart stop. It was not an accident, babe. Pulling the plug on Sarah was the best financial decision I ever made. My name is Douglas Sterling, and before you ask where I am watching from in the comments, let me tell you how I destroyed the man who murdered my daughter. The blizzard outside was nothing compared to the ice in my veins. My 1995 Ford pickup, the only relic from my life, before I made my first 80 million, struggled against the incline of the private road. I shifted gears, my gloved hands gripping the wheel, until my knuckles turned white. It was the second anniversary of Sarah's death. 2 years since the police chief, a man I had known for decades, looked me in the eye and called it a tragic slip and fall. 2 years since Brandon, her husband, had wept on my shoulder at the funeral, shaking with what I thought was grief. I had come here to mourn. I wanted to sit on the porch where Sarah used to paint, drink a glass of whiskey, and speak to her ghost in the silence of the mountains. I expected darkness. I expected the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. What I saw made me slam on the brakes. Through the swirling snow, the villa was glowing. Every light on the first floor was blazing. Smoke curled arrogantly from the chimney, disappearing into the gray sky. My breath hitched in my throat. This property was part of the Sterling Trust. It was legally sealed. No one, absolutely no one, had the authorization to be here. I killed the engine and let the truck roll silently into a grove of pine trees 100 yards from the gate. I didn't reach for my phone to call the police. The police in this town were useless, or worse, compromised. I stepped out into the biting wind, the cold stinging my face like needles. I didn't walk to the front door. I didn't ring the bell. I walked around the perimeter, trudging through knee-deep snow, moving toward the blind spot near the garage foundation. They thought they owned this place, but they forgot who built it. I made my fortune in biotech, but my hobby, my obsession, was security systems. When I built this villa for Sarah as a wedding gift 5 years ago, I installed a closed-circuit server room in the sub-basement behind a false panel. It was independent of the main grid, powered by a geothermal backup, and completely invisible to the casual user. I brushed the snow off the keypad hidden behind a loose stone. My fingers were stiff, but I punched in the code. 7 1 4. Sarah's birthday. The heavy steel door clicked and hissed open. I slipped inside and closed it, sealing myself in the humming darkness of the server room. It smelled of ozone and dry heat. I sat in the ergonomic chair that hadn't been touched in 2 years and woke the system up. One by one, the monitors on the wall flickered to life. The feeds from the living room, the kitchen, and the master bedroom filled the screens in high definition. My stomach turned. Brandon was standing in the center of the living room. He looked older than the last time I saw him, but not tired. He looked triumphant. He was wearing a cashmere sweater I recognized because I had bought it for him. He was laughing, his head thrown back, holding a crystal wine glass up to the light. I zoomed in on the bottle sitting on the coffee table. The label was unmistakable. Chateau Margaux, 1982. It wasn't just an expensive bottle of wine. It was the bottle. The specific bottle I had placed in Sarah's hands on her wedding day, telling her to open it only when she had her first child. It was a symbol of the future, of life, of legacy. And Brandon was pouring it down his throat like cheap water. He wasn't alone. A woman was lounging on the beige sofa, her feet propped up on the antique coffee table Sarah had restored herself. She was younger, perhaps 30, with the kind of polished, artificial beauty that screams high maintenance. She was scrolling through her phone, indifferent to the grandeur around her. This had to be Vanessa. I didn't know her name then, but I knew her type. She was wearing Sarah's cashmere throw blanket around her shoulders like a trophy. I watched my hand hovering over the audio controls. I needed to hear them. I needed to know why my son-in-law, the man who claimed he couldn't bear to step foot in this house because the memories were too painful, was currently throwing a party in my dead daughter's sanctuary. I unmuted the feed. The sound was crisp. Brandon's voice filled the small server room. "This is the life, Ness," he said, refilling her glass. "Can you believe the old man just left this place sitting here? It's criminal." The woman saw. Vanessa laughed. It was a sharp, grating sound. "Well, he thinks it's a shrine to Saint Sarah. If he knew we were up here drinking his vintage wine, he'd probably have a heart attack. Which honestly would solve a lot of our cash flow problems." Brandon smirked. "Don't worry about Douglas. He's a ghost. He sits in that penthouse in the city and stares at the wall. He hasn't checked on the estate financials in 18 months. I've been skimming off the maintenance fund since July. He doesn't have a clue." I sat there in the dark, my fists clenched so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. Skimming. He was stealing. But that was just money. Money I could lose. Money I could make back. What hurt was the disrespect. The casual way they spoke her name, Saint Sarah. I was about to record the clip to send it to my lawyer Blackwood and have the sheriff drag them out in handcuffs for trespassing and embezzlement. My finger was on the execute key. Then the kitchen door on the screen swung open. A small boy ran into the living room. He couldn't have been more than 4 years old. He was wearing dinosaur pajamas and carrying a plastic truck. He ran straight past the fireplace, ignoring the dangerous proximity to the flames, and crashed into Brandon's legs. "Daddy, look," the boy squealed. "Truck goes vroom." I froze. My brain tried to process the math, but the numbers refused to align. Sarah died 2 years ago. This child was walking, talking, and clearly at least 4. Brandon looked down, his face softening in a way that made me sick. He picked the boy up. "Hey, buddy. You supposed to be asleep." Vanessa sighed, putting her phone down. "He won't sleep in that room, Brandon. He says it's too cold. You need to fix the heating if we're going to live here for the winter." "Live here?" They were moving in. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was the timeline. If that boy was 4 years old, Brandon didn't just meet Vanessa after Sarah died. He didn't meet her during his grieving period. He had been with her years before Sarah's death. While my daughter was going through IVF treatments, while she was crying in my arms because she couldn't conceive, while she was blaming herself for not giving Brandon a family, he already had one. He had a secret family, a secret life. I felt a physical blow to my chest, harder than any heart attack. I stared at the screen, analyzing the boy's face. He had Brandon's chin. There was no denying it. I watched as Brandon set the boy down. "Go to Mommy, Leo. Daddy needs to finish his wine." The boy ran to Vanessa and climbed onto her lap. She stroked his hair absent-mindedly. Brandon sat down next to them, putting his arm around the woman who had helped him make a fool of my daughter. "You know, Ness," Brandon said, his voice dropping lower, more reflective. "I was thinking about the timeline today. Driving up here. It's been exactly 2 years. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Are we going to do the guilty thing tonight because I don't have the energy for it? You promised me that once we got access to the villa, the drama was over." "It's not guilt," Brandon said, taking a long sip of the 1982 Margot. "It's relief. I'm just marveling at how close we came to losing it all." "What do you mean?" Vanessa asked. "If she hadn't had that accident," Brandon said, staring into the fire, "if she had actually gone through with the audit of the patent portfolio she was talking about, she would have found the transfers. She would have found out about the condo I bought you in the city. She would have divorced me, Ness. And if Sarah Sterling divorced you, you didn't just lose a wife. You lost the industry. Her father would have blackballed me from every boardroom from New York to Tokyo. I leaned closer to the monitor. Audit. Transfers. Sarah knew. Or she was about to know. That was why she seemed so distant in those final weeks. She wasn't depressed. She was suspicious. Vanessa scoffed. Well, she didn't find out. You got lucky. She slipped on the ice. End of story. Brandon chuckled, a low, dark sound that vibrated through the speakers in my cold bunker. Luck had nothing to do with it, babe. You make your own luck. I stopped breathing. The air in the server room felt suddenly thin. What are you talking about? Vanessa asked, looking at him. Her expression shifted from boredom to a sudden, sharp alertness. Brandon swirled the wine. You remember that night she was in the hospital? The doctors said she was stable. They said it was just a severe concussion and hypothermia. They said she'd wake up in the morning. I remembered. God, I remembered. I was stuck in London on a business trip. All flights were grounded due to the storm. I was screaming at my assistant to get me a private jet, anything to get back to Aspen. Brandon had called me. He told me not to worry. He told me he was by her side. Vanessa nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember. You called me from the cafeteria. You were panic-stricken. You said if she wakes up, she remembers the argument on the balcony. She remembers I pushed her. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk. Pushed her. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't the ice, they had argued. He had pushed his wife, my Sarah, off the balcony into the snowbank below. Brandon waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, well, I fixed it. I went back into the room. The nurse was on break, shift change. It's amazing how lax security is in these small-town hospitals when you're the grieving, wealthy husband. He took another sip of wine. I just helped her along. Vanessa pulled the child closer to her chest, her eyes wide. Brandon, what did you do? She was hooked up to that machine, Brandon said, his voice terrifyingly casual. The one that monitors the vitals. But she also had a morphine drip, a manual override. I didn't unplug anything. That would trigger an alarm. I just increased the dose, maximum flow. He turned to look at Vanessa, a smile playing on his lips. She just drifted off. Heart rate slowed down until it stopped. By the time the alarms went off, she was gone. No autopsy because, well, tragic accident, head trauma, grieving family. It was clean. He raised his glass in a mock toast to the portrait of Sarah hanging above the fireplace. Pulling the plug on Sarah, or rather pushing the plunger, was the best financial decision I ever made. Look at us now. We have the house. We have the patent rights. And the old man is too broken to notice we're bleeding his company dry. I sat back in the chair. The silence in my head was deafening. It wasn't grief anymore. Grief is hot. It burns. This was cold. This was absolute zero. He killed her. He didn't just cheat on her. He didn't just push her. He walked into her hospital room, looked at my daughter, the woman who had loved him, supported him, built him up, and he executed her to save his own skin and his bank account. And now he was drinking her wine and warming his feet by her fire. I looked at the download bar on the screen. The recording was complete. The file was saved to the local drive and backed up to my private cloud server. I had the confession. I had the visual. I had everything I needed to send him to the electric chair. But as I reached for the phone to call the FBI, I stopped. I looked at Brandon's face on the screen. He looked so comfortable, so safe. If I called the police now, they would come. There would be a trial. He would hire expensive lawyers. He would argue the recording was inadmissible, or that he was drunk and bragging, or that it was a deepfake. He might get off, or he might go to a white-collar prison for 10 years and come out to spend the money he had stashed away. No, that wasn't enough. He had taken my daughter's life. He had taken her future. He had taken the last 2 years of my life and turned them into a living hell of sorrow. I didn't just want justice. I wanted obliteration. I wanted to strip him of everything. His reputation, his money, his freedom, his ego. I wanted him to feel the cold that I felt. I wanted him to know in the split second before I destroyed him that it was me. I looked at the system controls. I had access to everything. The heating, the lights, the locks, the accounts linked to the house IP address. I checked the time. It was 11:00 p.m. I initiated a command on the keyboard. It wasn't an alarm. It was a subtle adjustment. I accessed the master thermostat for the master bedroom, the room they were undoubtedly planning to sleep in tonight. I locked the controls and set the temperature to drop to 40 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 3 hours. Slow, imperceptible until it was bone-chilling. Then I accessed the audio system. I found a playlist Sarah used to listen to. Rachmaninoff, heavy melancholic piano. I set a timer. 3:30 a.m. Volume level 15%. Just loud enough to wake you up, but soft enough to make you wonder if you're imagining it. I stood up. My knees cracked, but I felt stronger than I had in years. I ejected the hard drive containing the footage. I slipped it into my inside pocket right next to my heart. I walked out of the server room, sealing the door behind me. The keypad beeped once, a sound of finality. I retraced my steps through the snow, the wind howling around me. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I was fueled by a different kind of energy. I climbed back into my truck. I watched the villa for one last moment. The lights were still warm and inviting a lie against the night sky. "Enjoy the wine, Brandon," I whispered into the darkness. "It's the last expensive thing you'll ever taste." I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I didn't turn on my headlights until I was back on the main road. I drove straight to the only place in town open at this hour, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the highway. I had a phone call to make. Not to the police. Not yet. I needed to call Blackwood, my attorney. And I needed to call Vince, the private investigator I had fired 2 years ago because I thought his theories about foul play were the ravings of a man trying to milk a grieving father. I pulled into the diner parking lot. The neon sign buzzed overhead. I took out my phone. "Blackwood," I said when he answered, his voice groggy with sleep. "Don't hang up. I need you to freeze the trust fund. Yes, right now. And get the jet ready. I'm coming back to the city. We have a patent portfolio to audit." "Douglas," he stammered. "What's going on? It's midnight." "I know what time it is," I said, looking at the hard drive in my hand. "It's time to wake up." I hung up and dialed the next number. Vince picked up on the second ring. "Sterling?" Vince asked, sounding surprised. "I thought you told me to go to hell." "I did," I said. "I was wrong. I'm at the diner off Route 82. I have a video you need to see, and I need you to find out everything there is to know about a woman named Vanessa and a 4-year-old boy named Leo. I want to know where they were born, where they live, and how much Brandon Cole has paid them over the last 5 years." "I'm on my way," Vince said. The line went dead. I walked into the diner and ordered a black coffee. I sat in the booth watching the steam rise from the cup. For 2 years, I had been a ghost in my own life. I had let Brandon run my company live in my houses and spend my money because I didn't care enough to stop him. I thought he was the only link I had left to Sarah. I was wrong. He wasn't the link. He was the disease. And I was the cure. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. The game had changed. They thought they were living in a mountain villa. They didn't realize they were living in a cage. And I had just locked the door. The diner smelled of burnt grease and stale coffee, a scent that clung to the vinyl booths and the peeling wallpaper. I sat in the back corner, my back to the wall, watching the entrance. At 2 in the morning, the only other patrons were long-haul truckers and insomniacs, people who had no interest in the old man, in the expensive coat, staring into a black ceramic mug. I was not there to eat. I was there to buy the truth. Vince walked in 3 minutes later. He looked like a man who had slept in his car, which he probably had. His trench coat was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot, but the thick manila envelope tucked under his arm was pristine. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He slid into the booth opposite me and placed the envelope on the table between us. It hit the formica surface with a heavy, dull thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. "You were right," Vince said without preamble. His voice was a gravelly whisper. "I owe you an apology, Douglas. 2 years ago, when I told you the police report was solid, I was lazy. I trusted the badge. I didn't dig. I didn't want his apologies. Apologies wouldn't bring Sarah back." I pushed my untouched coffee toward him. "Tell me what you found." Vince opened the envelope. He pulled out a document that looked official, stamped with the seal of the county coroner. But it wasn't the document I had received 2 years ago. The paper I had seen back then was a single page, a summary that listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest, secondary to hypothermia and blunt force trauma. This document was thick. It was dense with medical jargon graphs and toxicology screens. "Look at page 4, Vince said, tapping a line of text highlighted in yellow. I put on my reading glasses. The numbers swam before my eyes until they coalesced into a terrifying clarity. Blood toxicology screen. Subject Sarah Sterling. Time of sample 11:45 p.m. I read the substance name. Midazolam. "It is a benzodiazepine," Vince explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "It is a powerful sedative used for anesthesia or severe insomnia. It causes muscle weakness, drowsiness, and anterograde amnesia. The therapeutic range is 0.1 to 0.2 micrograms per milliliter." I looked at the number next to Sarah's name. 0.8. "She didn't slip," Douglas Vince said. "She was chemically incapacitated. That amount of midazolam would make a grown man unable to walk a straight line, let alone stand on an icy balcony. He drugged her. He put it in her tea or her wine hours before they went out onto that terrace. She didn't lose her balance because of the ice. She lost it because her own muscles refused to obey her." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The image of Brandon pouring the wine on the screen in the server room flashed in my mind. He liked to play bartender. He liked to mix the drinks. How many times had he handed Sarah a cup of tea, smiling that charming smile while watching her drink the poison he had prepared? "But that is not the smoking gun," Vince continued, flipping to the next page. "This is the part that sends him to prison." This screen was taken 3 hours later after she was admitted to the hospital. "Look at the opiate levels. Morphine. The levels were off the charts. We knew she was on a drip for the pain," Vince said. "But the concentration in her blood at the time of cardiac arrest was 5 times the lethal dose for a woman of her weight." The machine logs show a manual override code was entered at 2:14 a.m. That was exactly 3 minutes before the flatline alarm triggered. I closed my eyes. The server room confession was true. He hadn't just bragged. He had done it. He had manually increased the dosage until her heart simply gave up. It was a clinical, mechanical execution carried out in a sterile hospital room while I was stuck in an airport lounge in London, frantically calling her phone. "Who signed this?" I asked, my voice trembling, with a rage so intense it felt like a physical weight in my chest. "Who signed the death certificate that omitted all of this?" Dr. Aris, the attending physician, Vince said. "But he didn't bury the report alone. He flagged it. He sent it to the sheriff's office as a suspicious death. It was standard protocol." "Sheriff Miller," I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. I had known Jim Miller for 30 years. I had donated to his re-election campaigns. We fished together. He was the one who called me that morning. He was the one who told me it was a tragic accident. He was the one who told me an autopsy would only prolong the family's suffering. Miller buried it, Vince confirmed. He pulled out a second stack of papers. These were bank statements. Not Sarah's, not mine. Sheriff Miller's personal accounts. Look at the dates, Vince pointed. 2 days after Sarah died. A wire transfer for $50,000. It came from a shell company registered in Delaware called Phoenix Consulting. I recognized the name. It was one of Brandon's side projects, a dummy corporation he used for what he called speculative investments. Miller has a gambling problem, Douglas Vince said. He owes money to bookies in Vegas and Atlantic City. He was drowning. He was going to lose his badge, his pension, everything. Brandon didn't just get lucky. He bought the law. He paid $50,000 to turn a murder investigation into a closed case file. I stared at the bank statement. $50,000. That was the price of my daughter's life. That was what Sarah was worth to the man sworn to protect this county. My money, the money I had earned, the money I had given Brandon to start his business, had been used to bribe the police to cover up the murder of my own child. The corruption was absolute. It wasn't just a bad apple. It was a rotten orchard. The doctor, the sheriff, the husband. They had all conspired to erase Sarah from existence, to turn her into a line item in a ledger, a problem to be solved with a wire transfer and a signature. I looked up at Vince. Does Miller still have the original file? Vince nodded. He keeps insurance. He's corrupt, not stupid. If Brandon ever stops paying, or if the feds come sniffing, Miller wants a bargaining chip. He has the unredacted toxicology report and the digital logs from the hospital pump in a safe in his home office. I tracked his movements. He checks it once a month. I took a deep breath. The air in the diner felt too thick, too hot. I needed to leave. I needed to think. Can you get it? I asked. Vince leaned back. Breaking into a sheriff's home is a different kind of job, Douglas. That's a felony. That's prison time if I get caught. I pulled my checkbook from my inside pocket. I wrote a number that made Vince's eyebrows shoot up. I don't want you to steal it, I said, tearing the check out and sliding it across the table. I want you to verify it is there. I want you to take photos of it. And I want you to find out exactly how much debt Miller still has. I want to own his debt. I want to buy the note from every bookie he owes. Vince looked at the check, then at me. You're going to squeeze him. I stood up, buttoning my coat. I'm not going to squeeze him, Vince. I'm going to crush him. But not yet. Miller is a pawn. I want the king. I walked out of the diner into the freezing night. The wind had died down, leaving a silence that felt heavy and expectant. The stars were bright and cold above the mountains. I drove back to the hotel, my mind racing with cold mathematical precision. I had the video confession. I had the financial trail. I had the proof of the cover-up. I could go to the FBI now. I could have them all arrested by sunrise. But prison was too good for them. Prison was a structure, a routine, a place where they would still exist. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted Brandon to feel the walls closing in, not of a jail cell, but of his own mind. I wanted him to doubt his sanity. I wanted him to feel the fear Sarah must have felt in those last moments when her body failed her. I opened my laptop in the hotel room. The remote connection to the villa's smart system was still active. The screen showed the master bedroom. Brandon and Vanessa were asleep, entangled in the sheets, oblivious to the fact that their world had already ended. I checked the temperature sensors. It was dropping. 45 degrees in the room. They were pulling the duvet tighter, their bodies reacting to the unnatural cold I had commanded. I typed a command into the console. I accessed the lighting subsystem. I didn't want to wake them up fully. Not yet. I programmed the hallway lights to flicker. A pattern. Short, long. SOS. Then I accessed the audio speakers in the kitchen, the living room, and the hallway outside their door. I uploaded a file I had found on Sarah's old cloud drive. It wasn't music. It was a voice memo, a recording she had made years ago practicing a speech for a charity gala. Her voice, clear and vibrant, filled my headphones. We build our legacy not by what we take, but by what we leave behind. I set the audio to play on a loop, low volume, just a whisper, a ghost in the wires. I hit enter. On the screen, I saw Brandon stir. He sat up, looking around the dark, freezing room. He shook Vanessa awake. "Did you hear that?" he mouthed. I leaned closer to the screen, watching the fear ignite in his eyes. "Welcome to hell, Brandon," I whispered. I closed the laptop. The legal trap was set. The investigation was solid. Now it was time for the haunting. I lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't see Sarah's dead face. I saw her avenging angel, and he looked exactly like me. The office of Arthur Blackwood was a fortress of mahogany and silence located on the 45th floor of the Sterling Tower. It was the kind of room designed to intimidate, where the air was always cool, and the city below looked like a circuit board of moving lights. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rain lash against the glass, while Blackwood sat behind his desk, his face illuminated by the glow of 3 monitors. He was the best corporate attorney in the state, a man who could find a loophole in the 10 Commandments if you paid him enough. But tonight, he wasn't looking for loopholes. He was looking at a crime scene. "Douglas, you need to see this," Blackwood said, his voice devoid of its usual confidence. I turned away from the window. The reflection of my own face in the glass looked like a stranger, gray and hollowed out by the revelations of the last 24 hours. I walked to the desk. Blackwood turned one of the monitors toward me. It displayed a digital copy of a withdrawal authorization form from the Sterling Family Trust. The date was 3 months ago. The amount was $2 million. And at the bottom of the page, in sharp, confident black ink, was my signature. I stared at it. It was perfect. The loop of the D, the sharp angle of the S. It was my hand. I had signed thousands of documents in my life, and I knew the rhythm of my own autograph. But I had not signed this. 3 months ago, I was in a clinic in Switzerland, trying to treat the insomnia that had plagued me since Sarah's funeral. I was thousands of miles away from the secure terminal required to authorize this transfer. "He is good," I said softly. "I will give him that." He practiced. "It is not just practice," Blackwood corrected, tapping the keyboard. "He used a digital stylus and a biometric override. He lifted your signature from the deed of the villa and superimposed it. But he made a mistake. He got greedy with the timestamps." Blackwood pointed to the metadata log on the side of the screen. The document was executed at 3:14 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The IP address originated from the villa in Aspen. The secure token used to bypass the 2-factor authentication was registered to Sarah's old laptop. "He used her computer." I whispered, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over me. "He sat in the house I built for her, opened the laptop she used to write her thesis, and used it to rob me." "Where did the money go, Arthur?" I asked. Blackwood opened a spreadsheet that looked like a spider web of transactions. It was complex, designed to confuse auditors, but to a trained eye, it was a roadmap of desperation. He routed it through a shell company in Delaware called Phoenix Consulting. Blackwood explained. "That is the hub. From there, it splintered. 300,000 went to a luxury car dealership in Miami. That is the Porsche he is driving. 200,000 went to a crypto wallet that we cannot trace yet, but I suspect it is being used to pay off gambling debts. High-stakes poker was always his vice. And the rest I asked." Blackwood hesitated. "This is where it gets dark, Douglas. A significant portion, nearly $500,000, was paid out in small, irregular intervals to 3 individuals. I ran background checks on them. One is the Sheriff Miller, which aligns with what your investigator Vince found. The other two are a nurse named Elena, who worked the night shift at the hospital where Sarah died, and a clerk at the county coroner's office. I closed my eyes. He wasn't just buying cars. He was buying silence. He was paying a monthly salary to the people who helped him sweep my daughter's murder under the rug. My money. The wealth I had accumulated over 40 years of innovation and hard work was being used to pay the wages of the conspiracy that killed my child. It was a closed loop of perversion. I was financing my own daughter's erasure. But why $2 million, I asked, opening my eyes. If he just wanted to cover his tracks and live the high life with his mistress, $2 million is a lot, but it is finite. He knows the trust has controls. He knows if he drains too much, the automatic audits kick in. He is risking everything for a relatively small amount of cash. He is not looking at the cash. Douglas Blackwood said, switching to a new document. He is looking at the asset. He is leveraging the cash to buy time until he can liquidate the big prize. Blackwood brought up a patent filing. U.S. Patent number 908-442. Title: Synthetic Tissue Regeneration Matrix, using CRISPR modification. Inventor: Sarah Sterling. The Gen X patent, I said. The name was a joke Sarah had made, saying it would generate the next factor of healing. It was her life's work. Sarah wasn't just a socialite. She was a brilliant biochemist. She had developed a method to accelerate skin graft healing by 300%. It was revolutionary. It was humanitarian. She wanted to license it to the Red Cross and global relief agencies for pennies. She wanted to save burn victims in war zones. She had explicitly forbidden the commercialization of the core tech for cosmetic use. It is valued at $15 million, conservatively, Blackwood said. But if sold to a cosmetic pharmaceutical giant for anti-aging applications, it could be worth $50. Brandon has been in talks with a conglomerate in Zurich. He has a preliminary agreement on the table. He can't sell it, I said, slamming my hand on the desk. The patent is held in the trust. It requires 2 signatures to release, mine and Sarah's. With Sarah gone, it reverts to me as the executor. Blackwood nodded slowly. Exactly. That is why he hasn't run away yet. That is why he is still playing the grieving husband. He needs your signature, Douglas. He needs you to sign a release form transferring the patent rights to him or to a joint entity he controls. I looked at the paperwork. There was a draft contract prepared by Brandon's lawyers. It was titled the Sarah Sterling Memorial Foundation. He is going to pitch it as a charity, I realized. The audacity was breathtaking. He was going to come to me, tears in his eyes, and tell me he wanted to start a foundation in Sarah's name. He would ask me to donate the patent to the foundation to help the world, and buried in the fine print of the foundation's bylaws would be a clause allowing the directors to liquidate assets for operational costs. He would sell her legacy to a face cream company, pocket the $50 million, and disappear with Vanessa and the boy. He thinks I am senile, I said, my voice cold. He thinks I am a broken old man who is so desperate to honor his daughter that I will sign anything he puts in front of me. He is banking on your grief making you blind. Blackwood agreed. And technically, he has already started the process. He forged a power of attorney document last week. It is clumsy, but it might hold up in a low-level court if you don't contest it. He is trying to bypass you entirely, but he knows it is risky. He prefers you to sign willingly. It is cleaner. I walked back to the window. The city lights blurred in the rain. I thought about the 4-year-old boy I had seen on the camera, the boy who was alive while Sarah was dying. Brandon needed that $50 million not just for greed, but for survival. He was bleeding money. The hush money payments, the debts, the high-maintenance mistress. He was a man running on a treadmill that was moving faster than his legs could carry him. If he didn't sell that patent, the house of cards would collapse. The sheriff would talk. The nurse would talk. The bookies would break his legs. He is desperate, I said. And dangerous, Blackwood added. If he realizes you know Douglas, if he realizes the gig is up, he has nothing to lose. He killed once to protect his lifestyle. He will do it again. I turned back to Blackwood. I don't want to sue him, Arthur. Blackwood looked confused. Douglas, we have enough for a federal indictment. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery. We can lock him up for 20 years just on the financials. No, I said. If we arrest him now, it becomes a legal battle. He will use the stolen money to hire defense teams. He will drag Sarah's name through the mud. He will claim she was mentally unstable, that she gave him permission, that the patent was his idea. It will take years, and in the end he might get a plea deal. I leaned over the desk, looking at the forged signature. I want him to believe he has won. I want him to think I am the fool he takes me for. I want him to stand on the precipice of having everything he ever wanted, the money, the freedom, the victory. And then I want to push him off. I checked my watch. It was 4:00 a.m. He is going to call me, I predicted. The timeline fits. He tried to break me psychologically with the ghost in the house tonight. Now he will offer the olive branch. He will try to get me to the villa. He needs me in the same room to sign the patent transfer. As if summoned by my words, my cell phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up. The name displayed was Brandon. Blackwood stared at the phone. You don't have to answer that. I picked it up. My hand was steady. My heart was a block of ice. I swiped accept and put the phone to my ear. I let my posture slump. I let my voice tremble, channeling the broken, confused old man Brandon wanted me to be. Hello, I rasped. Douglas Brandon's voice was warm, thick with concern. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I am so sorry to call this late. I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about Sarah. I paused, letting a heavy silence hang on the line. I miss her, Brandon, I said, injecting a quiver into my tone. God, I miss her. I know, Dad, he said, using the term he knew lowered my defenses. I am at the villa. I came up here to feel close to her. But it is hard being here alone. The memories are everywhere. He was lying. He wasn't alone. Vanessa was probably next to him, and the heating was likely fixed by now. Or maybe he was calling me, shivering from the cold I had inflicted upon him, trying to play it off as emotional chills. Douglas, he continued, his voice gaining a frantic edge. I had a vision, a way to honor her. I want to start a foundation for her research. I want to make sure her work saves lives. But I can't do it without you. We need to do this together, as a family. I closed my eyes, visualizing the patent document, the $15 million, the poison in Sarah's blood. A foundation, I repeated, sounding weak. That sounds beautiful, Brandon. She would have wanted that. Come up to the villa this weekend, he urged. We can have a small memorial, just us. We can sign the papers to set it up. We can finally say goodbye to her properly. I looked at Blackwood. I nodded. I will come, I said. I will bring the papers. We will sign everything. Thank you, Douglas, Brandon said, and I could hear the triumph dripping from his words. You won't regret this. I hung up the phone. The room was silent. He took the bait, Blackwood said softly. I stood up and buttoned my coat. He didn't take the bait, Arthur. He swallowed the hook. I walked to the door. Prepare the paperwork, I said. Not the transfer. I want the real paperwork, the forensic audit, the toxicology report, the video files, and call the FBI. Tell them to be on standby in Aspen. Tell them I am serving up a white-collar criminal on a silver platter. But tell them to wait for my signal. When is the signal? Blackwood asked. When the ink is dry, I said. I walked out into the hallway. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. I was going back to the mountain. But this time I wasn't going as a grieving father. I was going as the executioner. The sophistication of his financial crimes was impressive, but he had forgotten the first rule of business: never steal from the man who built the bank. Brandon thought he was playing chess. He didn't realize I had already set the board on fire. I sat in the darkness of my hotel suite, the blue light of my laptop screen, the only illumination in the room. On the display, the interior of the mountain villa was rendered in high-definition, grayscale night vision. It was 3 a.m. Brandon and Vanessa were asleep in the master bedroom, entangled in a mess of expensive Egyptian cotton sheets that I had paid for. They looked peaceful. They looked safe. It was an insult to the memory of my daughter who had died alone and terrified in the freezing cold. I took a sip of water, my hand steady, and prepared to strip away their sanctuary layer by layer. I was not just a grieving father anymore. I was the operator of a system they did not understand, the ghost in the machine that controlled the very air they breathed. I opened the command console for the villa's HVAC system. When I designed the house for Sarah, I had installed an industrial-grade climate control unit capable of maintaining a constant temperature regardless of the Aspen blizzards. But every system has an override. I typed in the admin code, locking out the local wall panels. I set the target temperature for the master suite to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I engaged the rapid cool cycle, which pulled freezing air directly from the outside vents, bypassing the heating elements entirely. On the screen, the reaction was slow but inevitable. Within 20 minutes, Vanessa stirred. She pulled the duvet up to her chin, curling into a ball. Brandon shifted, groaning in his sleep, as the room turned into an icebox. I watched them shiver, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. They were feeling a fraction of the cold Sarah had felt when her body began to shut down. The cold that Brandon had claimed was a tragic accident. But cold was just physical. I needed to break their minds. I opened the audio subsystem. The villa was wired with a high-fidelity sound system, hidden in the walls, designed to fill the house with music during the parties Sarah loved to host. I scrolled through the media library stored on the local server until I found it. A recording from 3 years ago. It was just an audio file of Sarah playing the Steinway grand piano that sat in the living room. She was practicing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was a heavy, ominous piece full of crashing chords and haunting silences. She used to play it when she was stressed, the music echoing through the house like a storm. I set the audio to play only in the master bedroom and the hallway leading to it. I set the volume to start at a whisper and crescendo over 5 minutes. I pressed enter. On the monitor, the room was silent to my ears, but I saw the effect. Vanessa sat up abruptly, her eyes wide in the darkness. She shook Brandon violently. He woke up confused, reaching for the lamp on the nightstand, but the light didn't turn on. I had disabled the lighting circuit for the bedroom. They were trapped in the dark, in the freezing cold, with the sound of his dead wife's piano playing, getting louder and louder. I watched Brandon stumble out of bed. He was wearing silk boxers, shivering violently as he fumbled for his phone to use as a flashlight. He walked into the hallway trying to find the source of the music. He went to the wall panel to turn it off, frantically tapping the screen. I had disabled the touch interface. He was locked out. The music swelled, the heavy notes of the Rachmaninoff crashing around him. Vanessa was screaming now. I couldn't hear her screams because I had muted the audio input to focus, but I saw her mouth open, her face contorted in pure terror. She was clutching the sheets to her chest, looking around the room as if expecting Sarah to walk out of the shadows. I stopped the music abruptly. The silence that followed must have been deafening. Then I executed the next phase. I opened an anonymous email client I had routed through 3 different proxy servers. I typed the subject line, "I know about the tea." In the body of the email, I wrote just 3 sentences. The midazolam in her blood was 0.8. The morphine drip was manually overridden. I have the video. I attached a low-resolution screenshot from the hidden camera footage I had downloaded earlier. It was a grainy image, but unmistakably Brandon standing over Sarah's hospital bed, his hand on the morphine pump control. I hit send to Brandon's personal email address, the one he had synced to the phone he was currently clutching in his hand. On the surveillance feed, I saw the notification light up his screen. The harsh white light of the phone illuminated his face. He looked at the notification. He froze. His skin, already pale from the cold, seemed to turn translucent. He read the email. Then he read it again. His hand shook so hard he almost dropped the device. Vanessa scrambled out of bed, wrapping the duvet around herself. She grabbed his arm, demanding to know what was happening. Brandon tried to pull the phone away, but she was faster. She snatched it from his hand. I zoomed in on her face as she read the email. The transformation was instantaneous. The fear of ghosts vanished, replaced by a much more primal fear of the man standing next to her. She looked at the photo. She looked at Brandon. She backed away from him, retreating until her back hit the cold wall. I turned on the microphone feed. I needed to hear this. "What is this, Brandon?" Vanessa's voice was high and shrill, cutting through the static. "Midazolam, you told me she slipped. You told me it was an accident." Brandon lunged for the phone, but she dodged him. "It's fake Ness. It's spam. Someone is trying to hack us." "Don't lie to me," she screamed. "That's you in the picture. That's her hospital room. You said you weren't there when she died. You said you were in the cafeteria getting coffee." "I was," Brandon yelled, his voice cracking. "Listen to me. Someone is messing with the house. The temperature, the music, the email. It's a coordinated attack. It's probably a disgruntled employee or a blackmailer. A blackmailer who knows about the drugs in her blood." Vanessa countered, her eyes wild. "You told me the autopsy was clean. You told me the sheriff fixed it." "He did fix it," Brandon shouted, realizing too late what he had admitted. Vanessa stopped moving. The room was freezing, but the realization seemed to paralyze her more than the cold. "He fixed it," she repeated slowly. "So there was something to fix. You killed her." "I did it for us," Brandon roared, slamming his fist against the wall. "Do you think we would be living here if she was alive? Do you think you would be driving a Porsche? She was going to cut me off, Vanessa. She was going to audit the accounts. We would be on the street. I did what I had to do." "You murdered her," Vanessa whispered, sliding down the wall to the floor. "And now someone knows. Someone has the video." She looked up at him, terror in her eyes. "Who sent this? Who is watching us?" Brandon paced the room like a caged animal. "I don't know. Maybe it's the sheriff trying to squeeze more money out of me. Maybe it's the nurse. I paid them off, but greedy people always come back for more. Or maybe it's the police," Vanessa said, starting to hyperventilate. "Maybe they are outside right now." "No," Brandon said, trying to regain control. "If it was the police, they would have kicked down the door. This is a shakedown. They want money. We just have to pay them." Vanessa laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. "There is no we. I didn't kill anyone. I just wanted a nice house. I didn't sign up for a life sentence." "You're an accessory, you idiot." Brandon grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "You spent the money. You lived in the house. You knew the sheriff was on the payroll. If I go down, you go down. They will take Leo. Do you understand? They will put your son in foster care." That was the breaking point. Mentioning the child snapped Vanessa out of her hysteria and into survival mode. She pushed Brandon away. "Don't you dare touch him. I'm leaving. I'm taking Leo and I'm getting out of here." "You can't leave." Brandon blocked the doorway. "If you leave, you look guilty. We have to stick together. We have to figure out who sent this." I watched them, a faint smile playing on my lips. The rats were turning on each other. The paranoia was setting in, but I wasn't done. I typed another command into the console. I wanted to turn the pressure up. I flashed the lights in the room. Once. Twice. Then I turned them on full brightness, blindingly white. Then I spoke. I accessed the intercom system. I didn't use my own voice. I used a text-to-speech generator modifying the pitch to sound deep, distorted, and mechanical. $5 million, the voice boomed through the speakers in the bedroom. Bitcoin transfer, 24 hours, or the video goes to the FBI. Vanessa screamed and covered her ears. Brandon spun around looking at the ceiling speakers, looking for the camera he couldn't see. "Who are you?" Brandon shouted at the ceiling. "Show yourself." "I am the witness," the mechanical voice replied. "TikTok Brandon." I cut the audio feed. I watched Brandon running to the closet, pulling out a suitcase. He was frantically throwing clothes into it. He wasn't thinking about fighting anymore. He was thinking about running. But he couldn't run. Not yet. He didn't have $5 million. He had spent the cash from the trust fund on cars and bribes. His accounts were almost dry. He needed the patent money. He needed me to sign the papers. This fear, this absolute panic was exactly what I needed. It would make him reckless. He would call me again. He would beg me to come up earlier. He would try to rush the signing so he could get the payout and pay off this invisible blackmailer. I watched Vanessa run out of the room, heading for the boys' bedroom. She was going to pack. She was going to try to flee. Brandon chased after her, grabbing her arm in the hallway. "You are not going anywhere," he hissed. "Douglas is coming this weekend. He is going to sign the papers. We get the patent, we sell it, we pay the blackmailer, and we disappear. Just hold it together for 48 hours. "I can't," she sobbed. "This house is haunted. He's watching us." "It's not a ghost," Brandon said, his eyes darting around the hallway. "It's a hacker. It's just technology. We can beat it. But I need you to be calm. If Douglas sees you like this, he will suspect something. You have to play the part Ness. One last performance. One last performance." He was right about that. I closed the laptop lid. I had seen enough. The seed was planted. They were terrified, desperate, and turning on each other. They would be sloppy. They would be vulnerable. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the hotel room. I looked at my reflection. I looked tired, old, and grief-stricken. Perfect. That was the costume I needed to wear. I needed to be the frail mourning father one last time. I needed to walk into that house of horrors, look the man who murdered my daughter in the eye, and smile as I handed him the pen that would seal his fate. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Blackwood. "It's done. They are breaking. Have the jet ready at dawn. I'm going to Aspen." Then I texted Vince. "Get the sheriff's file. I want Miller neutralized before I land. I don't want any local law enforcement interfering when the feds arrive." I packed my bag. I put the hard drive with the evidence in a secure pocket. I checked out of the hotel. As I walked through the lobby, the sun was just beginning to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. It was a beautiful day for a reckoning. Brandon thought he was fighting a blackmailer for money. He didn't realize he was fighting a father for his soul. And he had already lost. The private hangar at Teterboro Airport smelled of jet fuel and cold rain. I stood in front of the mirror in the small lounge adjusting my tie. It was an old tie, slightly frayed at the edges, a relic from a decade ago. I had chosen it deliberately. I was also wearing a suit that was a size too big, giving the illusion that I had shrunk, that grief had eaten away at my frame until there was nothing left but skin and bones. I leaned on a cane I did not need. I practiced the tremor in my hand. I practiced the vacant, watery stare of a man who has given up on the world. This was not a business trip. It was a performance, and the audience was a murderer who thought he was the director of the play. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. It was the call I had been waiting for since I sent the blackmail email at 3 a.m. Brandon was running out of time. The invisible blackmailer had given him 24 hours to pay $5 million. He didn't have the money. His only way out, his only lifeline, was the patent. And the only way to get the patent was to get me to sign it over to him before the clock ran out. I cleared my throat, finding the pitch of a broken father. I swiped the screen with a shaky finger. "Hello?" I answered, my voice barely a whisper. "Douglas," Brandon said. His voice was tight, high-pitched. He sounded like a man who had been screaming into a pillow. "I am so glad you picked up." I was worried. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, smiling at the ceiling. He was worried. He was terrified. "What time is it, Brandon?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Is everything all right?" "It is morning, Dad," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching. "Everything is fine." "Well, actually, it has been a rough night. The heating system at the villa is acting up. It is freezing up here." I knew. I had set the temperature myself. "I am sorry to hear that," I said. "You should call a repairman. Sarah always loved that house warm." There was a silence on the line. I could hear his breathing. It was rapid, shallow. He was probably pacing the room, looking at the corners, wondering where the cameras were. "I didn't call to talk about the heating, Douglas," he said, his tone shifting to that oily, earnest register he used when he was asking for money. "I called because I had an epiphany last night. I was sitting here looking at her photos, and it hit me. We have been grieving wrong. We have been sitting in the dark." I said nothing. I let him fill the silence. Desperate men always talk too much. "We need to do something positive," he continued, the words tumbling out. "I want to launch the Sarah Sterling Foundation immediately. This weekend. I have investors lined up who want to donate, but they need to see that we are committed. They need to see the patent in the foundation's name." Investors. He meant the buyers from the cosmetic conglomerate in Zurich. He meant the people who were going to turn my daughter's life-saving skin graft technology into a $100 anti-aging cream. "A foundation," I repeated, making my voice sound hopeful and fragile. "That sounds complicated, Brandon. I don't know if I have the energy for lawyers and contracts. My head, it isn't what it used to be." I closed my eyes, picturing his face. He would be grinning now, the shark smelling blood in the water. No, Douglas, you don't have to do anything," he assured me quickly. "I have handled it all." My lawyers drew up the papers. "It is just a standard transfer. We move the intellectual property into the non-profit entity. It is tax-free. It is what Sarah would have wanted. She wanted to heal the world, didn't she? He was using her altruism against me. It was a low blow, but effective. If I were truly the senile old man he thought I was, I would have wept with gratitude." "She did," I murmured. She was a good girl. "So here's the plan." Brandon said, the urgency bleeding through. "Come up to Aspen today. Not the weekend. Today. The weather is clearing up. I will send a car for you at the airport. We can have a nice dinner. Just the two of us. We can sign the papers, drink a toast to her, and put all this pain behind us. Today." He was rushing. The 24-hour deadline I had set as the blackmailer was ticking. He needed that signature before tomorrow morning so he could show the contract to his lenders, get a bridge loan, and pay off the person he thought was watching him. I paused. I wanted him to sweat. "Today?" I asked. "I don't know, Brandon. I have a doctor's appointment." My heart. "Douglas, please," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "I need you here. I can't do this alone. I feel like I am losing her all over again. If we don't do this now, I don't think I ever will. Please, do it for her." It was a masterful performance. If I didn't know he had murdered her, I might have believed him. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay, son. I will come. I will tell the pilot to prep the plane. Thank you." He exhaled. "You won't regret this. Bring the original patent certificates if you have them. And Douglas, drive safe." I hung up. I stared at the phone. Drive safe. He didn't care if I drove safe. He cared if the signature arrived intact. I walked out of the lounge and onto the tarmac. The Gulf Stream was waiting, its engines whining in the cold air. Blackwood was already on board, sitting in one of the leather seats with a briefcase on his lap. He looked up as I entered. "He took the bait?" Blackwood asked. "He is desperate," I said, handing my coat to the flight attendant. "He wants me there today. He wants the patent certificates." Blackwood nodded grimly. "I have the papers. The real ones are in the safe. The ones in this briefcase are for him. They look authentic. The transfer of the Gen X patent to the Sarah Sterling Memorial Foundation." I sat down across from him. "And the other papers?" Blackwood tapped a second, thinner folder. "The federal indictment drafts, the affidavits from the private investigator, the sworn statement from the forensic toxicologist, and the purchase agreement for the sheriff's gambling debts. It is all here." "Good," I said. I looked out the window as the plane began to taxi. "There is one more thing," Blackwood said, hesitating. "We received a report from the surveillance team watching the villa's exterior. A car left the property an hour ago. A black SUV. It was Vanessa and the boy." I turned to him sharply. "She's running. She is trying to," Blackwood said. "She drove to a motel in Glenwood Springs. She checked in under a fake name." She looked terrified. I leaned back. "Good. The rats are scattering. That means Brandon is alone in the house. He is isolated. He has no support system, no witness to back up his lies." "Did he try to stop her?" I asked. "According to the report, they had a screaming match in the driveway," Blackwood said. "He tried to take the keys. She threatened to scream. He let her go. He probably figures he can deal with her after he gets the money." "He is arrogant," I said. "He thinks money fixes everything. He thinks once he sells the patent he can buy her silence again. He doesn't realize she is the least of his problems." The plane accelerated, pushing me back into the seat. We lifted off, climbing through the gray clouds into the blinding sunlight above. It was a beautiful metaphor. Down there in the muck and the rain, Brandon was scrambling, lying, and sweating. Up here, I was calm. I was untouchable. I spent the flight reviewing the file. I memorized every transaction, every date, every lie. I needed to be ready. When I walked into that room, I couldn't slip. I couldn't show anger. I couldn't show strength. I had to be the lamb walking willingly to the slaughter, right up until the moment I pulled the knife. We landed in Aspen 2 hours later. The air was thin and crisp. A black sedan was waiting on the tarmac. The driver was one of Brandon's hired men, a thick-necked security guard who looked more like a bouncer than a chauffeur. "Mr. Sterling," the driver grunted, opening the door. "Mr. Cole is expecting you." I nodded, leaning heavily on my cane. "Thank you." The drive up the mountain was silent. I watched the trees blur past. The snow was deep, banking high on the sides of the road. It was the perfect setting for a tragedy. Or a reckoning. When the villa came into view, my heart clenched. It was a beautiful house. Timber and stone glass and light. Sarah had designed it herself. She wanted a place where she could see the stars. Now it was a crime scene. The driver pulled up to the front entrance. Brandon was waiting on the porch. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie. He looked impeccable, but up close I could see the cracks. His eyes were red-rimmed. His skin was pale. He was vibrating with the nervous energy that he was trying desperately to suppress. "Douglas," he called out, bounding down the steps. He opened the car door before the driver could. He grabbed my hand, shaking it with 2 hands, pulling me into a hug. He smelled of mints and stale alcohol. He was trying to cover the scent of his fear. "I am so glad you are here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I patted his back awkwardly, playing the part. "It is good to see you, son. You look tired." "It has been a long night," he said, guiding me up the steps. "I told you the heating, but I got it fixed. It is warm inside now. Come in. Come in." We walked into the foyer. The house was warm, almost stiflingly so. He must have cranked the thermostat to compensate for the freezing night I had put him through. Where is... I paused, looking around as if confused. I thought you had company. Brandon froze for a split second. Company, no. Just me. I told you I wanted to be alone with her memory. I nodded slowly. Of course. I must have misunderstood. He led me into the living room. The fire was roaring. On the coffee table, the bottle of 1982 Margot was gone, replaced by a pot of tea and a stack of legal documents. Please sit, Brandon said, gesturing to the armchair. Can I get you anything, tea, water? No, thank you, I said, sitting down with a groan of effort. I want to get this done, Brandon. I am tired. He sat on the sofa opposite me. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the briefcase Blackwood had handed me before I got in the car. I understand, he said softly. It is hard for me too. But this is the right thing to do, the foundation. It is going to change the world. He reached out and tapped the stack of papers on the table. I have everything ready, he said. The articles of incorporation, the transfer deeds. All we need is your signature on the release form for the Gen X patent. Once that is signed, the Foundation owns it. We can start saving lives immediately. I looked at the papers. I didn't pick them up, and you will run the Foundation, I asked. Yes, he said, nodding eagerly. I will serve as the executive director. Unpaid, of course. It is a labor of love. Unpaid. He was lying through his teeth. The salary structure for the director was buried in the appendix listed at $500,000 a year plus discretionary spending accounts. And the patent, I asked, my voice wavering. You won't sell it, Sarah. She didn't want it sold. She wanted it given away. Brandon's eyes flickered. Sell it? Never. We will license it. For free. To hospitals. To the army. That is the whole point, Douglas. To give it away. He was looking me in the eye, lying about the legacy of the woman he murdered. It took every ounce of my self-control not to reach across the table and strangle him. I sighed, a long rattle of a breath. Okay. Okay, Brandon. I trust you. You are the only one left who knew her like I did. I reached for my briefcase. I clicked the latches open. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I have the certificates here, I said, pulling out the folder Blackwood had prepared. The fake folder. Brandon's eyes widened. He stared at the folder like a starving man staring at a feast. Here, he said, pushing a gold pen toward me. Just sign on the dotted line. Right there. I took the pen. My hand shook. I brought the tip down to the paper. Brandon held his breath. I could see the pulse in his neck hammering. He was so close. He could taste the $50 million. He could see his freedom. I stopped. I lifted the pen. Actually, I said, looking up at him. There is one thing. What he asked, his voice tight. What is it, Douglas? The date, I said, frowning at the paper. This is dated for tomorrow. It doesn't matter, he said quickly. It is just a formality. Sign it. It is valid. I don't know, I muttered. I am old-fashioned. I like things to be correct. I closed the folder. Let me read it over one more time, I said. Just to be sure. Brandon looked like he was about to scream, but he forced a smile. Of course. Take your time. Read it. He stood up. I am going to the kitchen to get some water. Do you want some? No, I said. He walked into the kitchen. I watched him go. As soon as he was out of sight, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the USB drive containing the surveillance footage from the night before. I looked at the massive flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. It was a smart TV connected to the house network. I stood up, moving faster than an old man should. I walked to the TV. I plugged the USB drive into the side port. I sat back down before Brandon returned. He walked back in with a glass of water. His hand was shaking so much the water was sloshing over the rim. He sat down. "Read it?" he asked. I smiled. A real smile this time. Cold and sharp. "I didn't read it, Brandon," I said, my voice dropping the tremor. My voice was strong. It was the voice of the CEO who had crushed competitors for 40 years. "Because I wrote it." Brandon frowned. I picked up the remote control from the table. "I think we should watch a movie." "Brandon," I said. "Douglas, what are you doing?" he asked, standing up. "We need to sign the papers." "Sit down," I commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The authority in my voice hit him like a physical blow. He sat. I pointed the remote at the TV. "I prepared a presentation for the foundation," I said. "A tribute to Sarah. And to you." I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. But it wasn't a montage of happy memories. It was a high-definition black and white feed of the master bedroom from the night before. Brandon stared at the screen. He saw himself sleeping. He saw himself wake up. He saw Vanessa. He turned to me, his face draining of all color. "Douglas, what is this?" I leaned forward. "It is the director's cut, Brandon." On the screen, the lights in the bedroom flashed. The text-to-speech voice boomed through the TV speakers, echoing in the living room. $5 million, or the video goes to the FBI. Brandon looked at the TV, then at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I watched him connect the dots. The blackmailer, the hacker, the ghost. It wasn't a stranger. I stood up, dropping the cane. I stood to my full height. "It was me, Brandon," I said. "I am the witness." He scrambled back, knocking over the coffee table. The teapot shattered. You hacked the house. I built the house, you idiot," I said, stepping toward him. "I own the servers. I own the cameras. And I own you." Brandon looked at the door. He was thinking about running. "Don't bother," I said. "The gate is locked. The police are already here. But before they come in, I want you to watch the rest of the movie." I clicked the remote. The video changed. It wasn't the bedroom anymore. It was the hospital room. 2 years ago. Brandon saw himself on the screen. He saw himself standing over Sarah. He saw his hand on the morphine pump. He let out a sound, like a wounded animal. He fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands. "Turn it off," he screamed. "Turn it off!" Said, "Watch it. Watch yourself kill my daughter." I walked over to him. I looked down at the man who had ruined my life. "You wanted the patent?" I asked. "You wanted the money?" I threw the fake folder at him. The papers scattered over the floor. "You get nothing, Brandon. You don't get the money. You don't get the house. You don't even get a plea deal." I pulled out my phone. I dialed Vince. "Send them in," I said. The front door crashed open. But it wasn't the local sheriff. It was a tactical team from the FBI, led by a federal agent I had briefed personally. Brandon looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Douglas, please," he begged. "I can explain. She was in pain. I did it for mercy." "Mercy?" I asked. I leaned down close to his face. "I gave you a chance, Brandon. I gave you a chance to confess on the phone. I gave you a chance to run. You chose greed." The agents grabbed him, hauling him to his feet. They slapped the cuffs on him. As they dragged him out, he looked back at me. His eyes were wild, full of madness. "It's my house," he screamed. "You gave it to us. It's my house." I walked to the door. I watched them shove him into the back of an armored SUV. I looked at the lawyer Blackwood who had walked in behind the agents. Tell him, Arthur, I said. Blackwood adjusted his glasses. Actually, Mr. Cole, he said calmly, the deed was a life estate provision. Sarah only had the right to live here. Upon her death, the title reverted to the Sterling Trust. You have been trespassing for 2 years. Brandon screamed as the door slammed shut. I stood on the porch. The snow was falling again. The air was clean. I looked at the mountains. It is over, Sarah, I whispered. I walked back inside. I unplugged the USB drive. I turned off the TV. I picked up the bottle of 1982 Margot that Brandon had left on the counter the night before. It was empty. I threw it into the fireplace. The glass shattered. The flames roared. I walked out of the villa and locked the door. I didn't look back. I had a foundation to build, a real one, and I had a granddaughter to find. I didn't know where Vanessa had taken the boy, but I would find him. He was innocent. He was a victim of this mess, just like Sarah. I climbed into the car. Where to, Mr. Sterling? The driver asked. Home, I said, and for the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly where that was. The black sedan crunched over the gravel driveway, the sound like bones breaking under heavy boots. I looked out the tinted window at the villa. It stood like a fortress against the white backdrop of the Aspen Mountains, its floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with a warm, inviting light that I knew was a lie. To the casual observer, it looked like a sanctuary of grief and remembrance. To me, it looked like a crime scene that had been scrubbed clean with money and champagne. The driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree stump who Brandon had hired under the guise of security, opened my door. I stepped out into the biting cold, leaning heavily on my cane, allowing a tremor to shake my hand as I adjusted my scarf. I had to sell the image of the frail, broken patriarch one last time. Brandon was waiting at the top of the stone stairs. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, cut slim to show off the physique he maintained with a personal trainer paid for by my daughter's trust fund. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 men I recognized from the business pages of the Wall Street Journal. They were venture capitalists from Zurich, men who specialized in stripping assets and flipping patents for massive profits. They were the vultures Brandon had invited to feast on Sarah's legacy. Douglas Brandon called out, his voice booming with a performative warmth that made my skin crawl. He bounded down the steps, his arms open. He embraced me, and I smelled the stale mixture of expensive scotch and fear sweat. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was terrified, but he was masking it with the manic energy of a man who thinks he is 5 minutes away from the finish line. I am so glad you made it, he whispered in my ear, squeezing my shoulder a little too hard. Everyone is waiting for you. I pulled away gently, offering him a weak, watery smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world's sun. It is what Sarah would have wanted. Brandon turned to the investors, gesturing toward me with a flourish. Gentlemen, I would like you to meet Douglas Sterling, the man, the myth, and the grandfather of the Sarah Sterling Foundation. The investors shook my hand, with firm, dry grips, their eyes scanning me for signs of weakness. They saw the cane. They saw the ill-fitting suit. They saw an old man who had lost his fight. I could see the calculations running behind their eyes. They were thinking that the takeover would be easier than they thought. They were thinking that Brandon had delivered exactly what he promised, a rubber stamp. Please come inside. Brandon ushered us toward the massive oak doors. It is freezing out here. We have a fire going and plenty of wine. I walked into the foyer and the heat hit me like a physical wall. The house was filled with people. There were about 20 of them, a mix of investors, local socialites, and a few of Brandon's poker buddies who had been scrubbed up for the occasion. Soft classical music drifted through the air, the kind of generic somber playlist one downloads for a funeral reception. It was tasteful. It was elegant. It was completely soulless. Waiters circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. I recognized the catering company, It was the most expensive in Aspen. Brandon was burning through the last of the cash he had stolen from the maintenance fund to put on this show. He was betting everything on tonight. I walked through the crowd, nodding at strangers who offered me condolences that sounded rehearsed. "I am so sorry for your loss," a woman in a red dress said, touching my arm. She was an inspiration. "Thank you," I murmured, moving past her. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was looking for her. And then I saw her. Vanessa was standing by the grand piano, the same piano I had haunted them with the night before. She was laughing at something a banker was saying, her head thrown back, her neck exposed. She wasn't wearing the nanny uniform anymore. She was wearing a black silk gown that clung to her body, looking every inch the lady of the manor. But it wasn't the dress that made my vision blur with red fury. It was the necklace. Around her neck, resting against her skin, was a string of emeralds set in platinum. I knew every facet of those stones. I had bought them in Colombia 30 years ago. I had commissioned the setting in Paris. I had given them to Sarah on her 21st birthday. She had worn them to her graduation. She had worn them to her wedding rehearsal. They were her favorite piece, her signature. And now they were around the neck of the woman who was sleeping with her murderer. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a desecration so profound that for a second I forgot my role. I forgot I was supposed to be the senile old man. I wanted to march over there and rip them from her throat. I wanted to scream the truth until the windows shattered. But I forced myself to breathe. I forced the rage down into the cold pit of my stomach, where I kept my resolve. Not yet. The trap wasn't sprung yet. I walked toward her. The tap-tap-tap of my cane on the hardwood floor announced my approach. Vanessa froze when she saw me. The laughter died in her throat. She looked at Brandon, who was watching us from the bar with wide, panicked eyes. He gave her a subtle nod, a silent command to play her part. She composed herself, putting on a mask of polite deference. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is an honor to meet you. Brandon has told me so much about you." I stopped in front of her. I leaned in close, invading her personal space just enough to make her uncomfortable. I stared at the necklace. "That is a beautiful piece," I said, my voice raspy. "Very distinctive." Vanessa's hand flew to her throat, covering the stones. Her fingers were shaking. "Oh, thank you. It is just costume jewelry. Something I picked up at a vintage store." Costume jewelry. She was lying to the man who bought the raw stones. "It suits you," I said, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "It brings out the color of your eyes." My daughter Sarah had a necklace just like it. She loved emeralds. She said they reminded her of life, of envy. Vanessa paled. She took a step back. I didn't know that is a lovely coincidence." Brandon appeared at my elbow, inserting himself between us. He put a protective hand on Vanessa's back, guiding her away. "Douglas, you must be exhausted from the flight. Why don't we get you a drink?" I let him steer me away, but I kept my eyes on Vanessa. She was practically running toward the kitchen, desperate to get away from the ghost of the woman she was replacing. Brandon led me to the bar. He poured me a glass of water, his hands shaking so much he spilled a few drops on the polished counter. "Who is she?" I asked, feigning ignorance. She is the event coordinator." Brandon lied smoothly. "She helped me set this up last minute. She is very efficient. She has expensive taste for a coordinator," I noted. Brandon laughed nervously. "She likes to dress up. You know how it is." "Look, Douglas, I wanted to introduce you to Heinrich. He represents the consortium in Zurich. They are the ones who are going to match our initial donation to the foundation." He waved over a tall, gray-haired man who looked like he was carved out of granite. Heinrich approached, holding a glass of champagne. "Mr. Sterling." Heinrich said with a thick accent. It is a privilege. We are all very excited about the potential of the Gen X patent. The humanitarian applications are significant. Humanitarian. I looked at Heinrich. I knew his firm. They didn't do humanitarian. They did profit margins. They stripped assets and sold them for parts. I am just happy Sarah's work will continue, I said, playing the fool. She never cared about money. She just wanted to help people. Exactly, Heinrich agreed, exchanging a look with Brandon. That is why this partnership is so perfect. We have the distribution network to get her technology to the people who need it most. And the foundation structure Brandon has proposed ensures that the legacy remains pure. Pure. They were talking about laundering a stolen patent through a shell charity so they could commercialize it tax-free. It was the filthiest scheme I had ever encountered, and I had been in business for 40 years. We should do this, Brandon interrupted, checking his watch. He was sweating. The timeline was tight. He needed the signature before the banks closed in Zurich, so the funds could be wired immediately. If he missed the window, he would have to wait until Monday, and he didn't have until Monday. The blackmailer me had given him a deadline. Let's go to the study, Douglas, he said, taking my arm. It is quieter there. We can review the paperwork and make it official. I looked around the room one last time. The investors were watching us. They were vultures circling a dying animal. They thought I was the meal. They didn't realize I was the hunter. Lead the way, son, I said. Brandon walked me through the crowd. I felt the eyes of the room on my back. I saw Vanessa peeking out from the kitchen doorway, her face pale, her hand still clutching the necklace. She looked terrified. She knew something was wrong, but she was too deep in the lie to pull the ripcord. We entered the hallway leading to the study. The walls were lined with photos of Sarah. Sarah skiing. Sarah graduating. Sarah and Brandon on their wedding day. He had put them up specifically for tonight, a gallery of false devotion. I stopped at a photo of Sarah laughing in the snow. It was taken on this very property 3 years ago. She looked so happy, so alive. I miss her, Brandon said, standing behind me. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. I turned to look at him. His eyes were moist. He was crying. It was the most impressive performance I had ever seen. He almost believed his own lie. He had convinced himself that he was the victim, that killing her was a mercy, that stealing her work was an act of love. You really loved her, didn't you? I asked softly. More than anything, he whispered. I nodded. That is good to know, Brandon. Because where we are going, love is the only thing that matters. He looked confused for a second, but then shook it off. The study is just here. He opened the double doors. The study was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive fireplace where a fire was crackling. In the center of the room was Sarah's desk. It was covered in documents. Stacks of legal paper bound in blue folders waiting for a signature. And there, sitting on the corner of the desk, was a laptop. It was open. It was connected to the large flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace via an HDMI cable. Brandon had prepared a presentation, a slideshow of Sarah's life to set the mood, to manipulate my emotions one last time before I signed away her life's work. Perfect, I thought. He has set up his own execution chamber. Please sit, Brandon said, gesturing to the leather chair behind the desk. I sat down. The leather creaked. I placed my briefcase on the desk. Brandon walked around to the other side. He leaned his hands on the desk, looking down at me. He looked powerful. He looked in control. This is it, Douglas, he said. The moment we ensure she lives forever. He pushed a pen toward me. It was a Mont Blanc. Heavy, expensive. Just sign the transfer agreement, he said. And the patent release form. Then we can go out there and announce it to the world. I picked up the pen. I felt the weight of it in my hand. I looked at the papers. I saw the words irrevocable transfer and full rights. I looked up at Brandon. He was smiling. It was a hungry, predatory smile. I took a deep breath. The air in the room was thick with the smell of wood smoke and betrayal. "Actually, Brandon," I said, my voice dropping, the tremor becoming steady and hard as granite. "Before I sign this, there is something I want to show you." Brandon's smile faltered. "What I think the investors outside should see this too," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. It was small, silver, and unassuming, but it contained the weight of 2 years of lies. "What is that?" Brandon asked, his eyes narrowing. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I stood straight, my shoulders back, the full height of 6 feet 2 inches that I hadn't shown him all day. "It is the legacy you built, Brandon," I said. I walked to the laptop. Brandon moved to stop me, but I was faster. I plugged the drive into the USB port. The screen on the wall flickered. The slideshow of Sarah's happy life disappeared. "What are you doing?" Brandon hissed, reaching for the laptop. I grabbed his wrist. My grip was iron. I wasn't a frail old man. I was a father fueled by a rage that burned hotter than the fire in the grate. "Sit down," I commanded. Brandon tried to pull away, but he looked into my eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw the end. I hit the spacebar. The video began to play. But it wasn't on the laptop screen. It was on the massive TV above the fireplace. And because the study's audio system was linked to the main house speakers for the presentation, the sound boomed not just in the room, but throughout the entire villa. The music outside stopped. The chatter died. And then the voice of Brandon filled the house. Pulling the plug on Sarah was the best financial decision I ever made. Brandon's face went white. He looked at the screen. He saw himself sitting in the living room holding the wine glass. He saw the timestamp. Yesterday. He looked at me. His mouth opened in a silent scream. I smiled. "Start the show," I whispered. And then I walked to the doors of the study and threw them open so the investors, the mistress, and the murderer could all watch the truth together. The heavy oak doors of the study swung open with a groan that seemed to harmonize with the screams coming from the speakers. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving the cane behind on the desk. I didn't need it. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was a more effective support than any piece of wood. Behind me, Brandon stumbled, his face a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He scrambled to get past me, his hands reaching out as if he could physically grab the sound waves filling the air and stuff them back into the silence. But it was too late. The virus of truth had already infected the entire house. The main salon, which just moments ago had been a buzz of polite conversation, and the clinking of crystal, was now a tableau of frozen horror. The music had cut out completely. In its place, the surround sound system, which Brandon had so proudly showed off to the investors earlier, was broadcasting his own voice at a volume that shook the window panes. I walked to the railing of the mezzanine that overlooked the great room. Below me, the 20 guests were motionless, their heads turned upward toward the massive 80-inch screen mounted above the main fireplace. The screen, usually reserved for displaying digital art or stock market tickers during Brandon's parties, was now playing a home movie that no one was ever meant to see. It was footage from the kitchen camera. The timestamp in the corner read October 14th, 2 years ago. 9:45 p.m. The resolution was crystal clear. There was Sarah sitting at the island, her back to the camera, reading a book. She looked so small, so tired. She was wearing her favorite blue robe. And there was Brandon. He was standing at the counter preparing a tray of tea. The camera angle was merciless. It caught every movement of his hands. It showed him opening the small cabinet above the refrigerator, the one where we kept the cleaning supplies and the emergency medical kit. It showed him taking out a small vial. It showed him crushing the pills into a fine white powder on the granite countertop. The room below gasped as one collective organism. I saw Heinrich the Swiss investor drop his champagne flute. It shattered on the stone floor, but no one looked down. They couldn't take their eyes off the screen. On the video, Brandon swept the powder into the steaming mug of chamomile tea. He stirred it. He added honey. He stirred it again. Then he picked up the mug. The camera caught his expression as he turned toward his wife. He wasn't frowning. He wasn't crying. He was smiling. It was a soft, loving smile. The smile of a man bringing comfort to the woman he loved. He walked over to Sarah. He placed the mug in her hands. He kissed the top of her head. "Drink this, babe," the audio boomed through the room. The voice slightly distorted, but undeniably his. "It will help you sleep." Sarah looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. "You are so good to me." I gripped the railing. Hearing her voice so full of trust, so full of gratitude, was like a physical blow. She drank the poison. She thanked him for it. And he stood there watching her swallow her own death, his hand resting casually on her shoulder. Brandon rushed to the railing beside me. He looked down at the crowd, then up at the screen. He was hyperventilating. "It is a fake," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It is AI. It is a deepfake. Douglas made it. He is trying to frame me." The guests looked up at him. They saw a man unraveling. They saw the sweat pouring down his face. They saw the guilt written in the wild panic of his eyes. I didn't say a word. I just pointed the remote control at the screen and pressed the skip button. The video jumped forward. The timestamp changed. It was now 3 hours later. The scene was the master bedroom. Sarah was stumbling. Her legs were giving out. She was slurring her words. "Brandon, I don't feel right," she mumbled, clutching the doorframe. "My legs! I can't feel my legs!" On the screen, Brandon didn't help her. He didn't call 911. He checked his watch. He walked over to her and guided her not to the bed, but toward the balcony doors. "You just need some fresh air, Sarah," he said. "It is stuffy in here. Come outside." He opened the doors. The wind from the blizzard whipped into the room, blowing the curtains wild. He steered her out into the snow. The camera angle shifted to the exterior security feed. It showed them on the icy terrace. Sarah was leaning heavily on him, practically unconscious. Brandon looked around. He looked at the camera, or rather, he looked right through it, not knowing it was there. And then, with a shove that was shocking in its brutality, he pushed her. She went over the railing. She didn't scream. She was too drugged to scream. She just fell into the darkness below. Brandon stood at the railing for a moment. He adjusted his cuffs. He smoothed his hair. Then he walked back inside, closed the doors, and locked them. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Then a woman screamed. It was the socialite in the red dress. She covered her mouth, backing away from the fireplace as if the man on the screen could reach out and hurt her. Heinrich looked up at me. His face was gray. He looked at Brandon with a mixture of disgust and horror. He set his glass down on a passing tray and walked toward the front door without a word. The other investor followed him. They were running. They wanted no part of this. The foundation was dead. The deal was dead. Brandon ran down the stairs, chasing after them. "Heinrich, wait. You have to listen to me. It is doctored footage. He is a senile old man. He is vindictive." Heinrich stopped at the door. He turned around. He looked at Brandon, then at the screen where the video was still playing on a loop, the moment of the push over and over again. "I do not do business with butchers, Mr. Cole," Heinrich said coldly, "and my legal team will be contacting you regarding the attempted fraud." He slammed the door. Brandon stood alone in the foyer. He turned back to the room. His eyes landed on Vanessa. She was cowering near the kitchen entrance, her hands trembling. She had seen the video. She had seen the man she slept with murder his wife. and she knew that she was wearing the dead woman's necklace. Brandon marched toward her. "You," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "You tell them how much I loved her. Tell them this is insanity." Vanessa backed away, shaking her head. "Get away from me," she whispered. "You said it was an accident. You swore it was an accident." I pushed the button on the remote again. The video changed one last time. It was a new clip. Recent. From the hidden camera in the living room recorded just 48 hours ago. It showed Brandon and Vanessa on the couch. It showed them drinking the wine. And it played the audio that would seal his fate. Pulling the plug on Sarah was the best financial decision I ever made. Vanessa froze. The guests froze. That was it. The final nail. It wasn't just murder. It was greed. It was a confession of motive delivered in his own voice in high fidelity. Brandon looked at the screen. He saw himself saying the words. He saw the relaxed, arrogant posture he had held while drinking my wine. The denial died in his throat. He couldn't scream fake anymore. It was too real. It was too intimate. He looked around the room. The guests were backing away from him, forming a wide circle, isolating him in the center of the Persian rug. He was a pariah. A monster exposed under the bright lights of his own vanity. He looked up at me on the mezzanine. His face contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. "You ruined everything," he screamed, lunging toward the stairs. "You old bastard, I should have killed you too." He started running up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He was coming for me. He was going to finish the job he started with Sarah. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked at the heavy oak front doors of the villa. Right on cue, the wood splintered inward. A battering ram hit the lock. The doors flew open with a crash that shook the house. FBI federal agents, get on the ground. A dozen agents in tactical gear swarmed into the foyer, their weapons drawn, their boots thundering on the hardwood. They weren't the local deputies Brandon had paid off. These were federal agents from the Denver field office brought in by the mountain of evidence Blackwood had submitted hours ago. Brandon froze halfway up the stairs. He looked at the agents. He looked at me. "Get on the ground." Now the lead agent shouted, training a rifle on Brandon's chest. Brandon hesitated. For a second, I thought he might try something stupid. I thought he might try to reach for a weapon or try to run. But he was a coward. He had always been a coward. He killed women who couldn't fight back. He didn't fight men with guns. Slowly shaking violently, he raised his hands. He sank to his knees on the stairs. I stood at the top looking down at him. He looked small, pathetic. The master manipulator, the venture capitalist, the grieving widower, it was all stripped away. All that was left was a scared little man who got caught. Two agents rushed up the stairs. They grabbed him, pulling his arms behind his back. I heard the ratcheting sound of the handcuffs tightening. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Brandon Cole. You are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Sterling, wire fraud, interstate commerce violations, and embezzlement, the agent recited. Brandon twisted his head, looking up at me as they hauled him to his feet. "Douglas, tell them I am family. You can't let them take me." I walked down the stairs, slowly, step by step. The agents paused, letting me approach him. I stopped on the step just above him, so I was looking down into his weeping eyes. "Family," I asked, my voice calm and cold. I leaned in close. "You stopped being family the moment you poured that tea, Brandon. You are just a bad investment, and I am liquidating my assets." I nodded to the agents. "Take him out." As they dragged him down the stairs, screaming obscenities, another team of agents moved toward the kitchen. They surrounded Vanessa. "Ma'am, put your hands where we can see them," an agent ordered. Vanessa started crying. "I didn't do anything. I didn't know. I am just the girlfriend." You are wearing stolen property, I said, pointing to the emerald necklace with my cane. That necklace belongs to the estate of Sarah Sterling, and you are on record conspiring to cover up a felony. An agent stepped forward. Vanessa Miller. We have a warrant for your arrest as an accessory after the fact and for conspiracy to commit fraud. They cuffed her. She screamed, begging Brandon to tell them she was innocent, but Brandon was already being shoved into the back of an armored SUV outside. The romance was over. The rats were eating each other. I walked into the center of the living room. The guests were still there, shell-shocked, unsure if they were allowed to leave. The police were securing the scene, taking statements. I saw Blackwood enter through the broken front door. He walked over to me, looking at the chaos with a grim nod. "It is done," he said. "The sheriff was picked up at his house 20 minutes ago. Vince found the original toxicology report in his safe. He is singing like a bird to cut a deal." He gave up Brandon immediately. "Good," I said. I looked at the TV screen. The video had stopped playing, frozen on a frame of Brandon's face mid-laugh. I picked up the remote and turned the TV off. The room went dark save for the flickering light of the fire. Mr. Sterling, a federal agent, approached me. He was young, serious. "We need a statement, sir, and we need to collect the hard drive you used for the broadcast. It is evidence." I handed him the USB drive. "It is all there, Agent. The video, the audio, the financial records. My lawyer has the rest." The agent took the drive. "Thank you, sir. I am sorry about your daughter." I nodded. "Thank you." I looked around the room. The party was over. The food was untouched. The wine was warm. The house felt empty, but not in the sad way it had for the last 2 years. It felt clean. The ghost of Brandon was gone. The lie was gone. I walked over to the fireplace. Above the mantel, the portrait of Sarah looked down at the room. She was smiling in the painting, her eyes full of light. I reached out and touched the frame. "I got him honey," I whispered. "He won't hurt anyone ever again." I turned to leave, but Blackwood stopped me. "Douglas," he said quietly, "before you go." Brandon was screaming something about the house as they put him in the car. He said it was his. He said you signed it over to them as a wedding gift. He said he is going to sue you for illegal eviction from his own property. I stopped. A small, dry smile touched my lips. "Let him sue," I said. I walked to the door where the cold mountain air was rushing in. He forgot to read the fine print, Arthur. He always forgot the fine print. "What do you mean?" Blackwood asked, walking beside me. I stepped out onto the porch. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear, filled with a billion stars. "I gave them the house, yes," I said, buttoning my coat against the chill. "But I didn't give them the land. Or the title." I looked at Blackwood. "I gave Sarah a life estate. It is a specific legal designation. It means she owned the right to live there for her lifetime. But the moment she died, the ownership reverted instantly to the grantor. To you," Blackwood realized. "To the Sterling Trust," I corrected, "which I control." I looked back at the villa. "Brandon has been trespassing for 2 years," I said. "He hasn't been living in his house. He has been living in mine. And I just evicted him." I walked down the steps to the waiting car. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the snow in red and blue. It was a violent, chaotic scene, but to me, it looked like peace. I climbed into the back seat of the sedan. I was tired. My bones ached, but my mind was clear. "Take me to the airport," I told the driver. We drove down the mountain, leaving the lights of the villa behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening up there. Justice was happening. Cold, hard, undeniable justice. And as the car wound its way through the dark pine forests, I finally let myself close my eyes and sleep. Sarah was gone. But her name was clean. Her killer was in chains. And I was still here. And I had work to do. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles painted the snow in a violent, strobing rhythm, turning the pristine white landscape into a crime scene. I stood on the porch of the villa, the cold mountain air filling my lungs, watching the end of an empire that never really existed. Brandon was being hauled down the stone steps by two agents, who showed no regard for his Italian suit or his dignity. He was kicking and screaming, his voice raw with a mixture of panic and entitlement that only a man who has never faced consequences could muster. "You cannot do this," he howled, twisting his body in a futile attempt to look back at me. "This is my property. I have rights. You are arresting me in my own home." I leaned on the railing, looking down at him. Even in chains, even with the evidence of murder broadcast to the world, he was still clinging to the one thing he thought he had secured: the real estate, the asset, the symbol of his status. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. The agents paused, looking up at me. They knew who I was. They knew who had handed them this case on a silver platter. "Let him speak," I said, walking slowly down the stairs. My cane clicked against the frozen stone. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a clock counting down the final seconds of his delusion. Brandon stopped struggling. He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. He thought he saw a lifeline. He thought he could still negotiate. "Douglas, tell them," he pleaded, his breath coming in ragged clouds of steam. "Tell them you gave us the house. It was a wedding gift. You signed the deed over at the reception. I have the papers in the safe. This is illegal search and seizure. This is kidnapping." I stopped on the bottom step, eye level with him. I looked at the man who had poured poison into my daughter's tea and then slept in her pub bed. I looked at the man who had turned my grief into a profit margin. "You have papers," I agreed softly. "You have a deed." I remember signing it. It was a beautiful ceremony. Sarah looked like an angel that day. "Yes," Brandon nodded frantically. "Yes, she did. And you gave us the house. It is mine. By law, it is mine. You cannot evict me. You cannot invite the FBI in here." I smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a smile that signaled the final checkmate. "You never were much of a reader, were you, Brandon?" I asked. "You always skipped the fine print. You always looked at the bottom line number and ignored the terms and conditions." "What are you talking about?" he spat. I turned to Blackwood, who was standing by the patrol car holding a thick leather binder. "Show him Arthur." Blackwood opened the binder. He pulled out a copy of the deed. He walked over and held it up in front of Brandon's face. "Read Clause 4, Paragraph 2, I said. Brandon squinted at the document, the strobe lights flickering over the text. "It says, life estate," he mumbled, confusion clouding his face. "What does that mean?" "It means I never gave you the house, Brandon," I said, my voice hard as the granite beneath our feet. "I gave it to Sarah, and I gave it to her with a specific legal designation, a life estate." I stepped closer, invading his personal space. "It means Sarah owned the right to live on this property, to use it, to enjoy it, for the duration of her natural life. It is a common tool for estate planning. It protects assets from taxes. It protects assets from divorce. And most importantly, it protects assets from surviving spouses who might not have the family's best interests at heart." Brandon's face went slack. The fight drained out of him. Upon the death of the life tenant, I continued reciting the law I had written into the contract myself. The ownership of the property reverts instantly and automatically to the grantor. I pointed at myself. Me, or rather, the Sterling Trust. I watched the realization hit him. It was a physical blow. His knees buckled and the agents had to hold him up. The second Sarah's heart stopped beating, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, This house stopped being hers, and it certainly never belonged to you. You didn't inherit a mansion, Brandon. You inherited an eviction notice. I gestured to the villa towering above us. For the last 2 years, you haven't been the lord of the manor. You have been a squatter. You have been trespassing on my property. Every night you slept here, every bottle of wine you drank, every party you threw, you were committing a crime. And since you used the address to secure loans and commit wire fraud, you have added federal property theft to your list of achievements. Brandon stared at the house, the symbol of his victory, the prize he had killed for. It dissolved before his eyes. He had murdered his wife for a fortune he could never touch. No, he whispered. No, that is not fair. I earned it. I put up with her. He stopped realizing what he was saying, but it didn't matter anymore. Get him out of my sight, I said to the agents. They dragged him toward the car. He didn't scream this time. He didn't fight. He just hung his head, a broken man who had built his castle on sand. As they shoved him into the back seat, he looked at me one last time. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore. Only a vast, empty void. He knew. He finally knew that he had been playing a game he could never win against a man who wrote the rules. I turned away from him. I was done with him. By the garage, another drama was unfolding. Vanessa was being escorted out by 2 female agents. She wasn't wearing the silk gown anymore. Someone had thrown a heavy coat over her shoulders, but her feet were bare in the snow. She was shivering violently, her makeup streaked with tears. When she saw me, she stopped. She tried to pull away from the agents. Mr. Sterling, she cried out. Please, I didn't know about the murder. I swear I just thought he was greedy. I have a son. You saw him. You saw Leo. Please don't let them take me. I looked at her. I looked at the emerald necklace that the agents had removed and placed in an evidence bag held by a forensic technician. You wore her necklace, Vanessa, I said calmly. You slept in her bed. You listened to him brag about how smart he was for killing her, and you laughed. You didn't call the police. You poured another glass of wine. I didn't believe him, she sobbed. I thought he was joking. You knew, I said. Deep down you knew. Greed makes us blind, but it doesn't make us deaf. You are an accessory after the fact. And you are a co-conspirator in the fraud. You signed the papers for the shell companies. My lawyer found your name on the bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. You spent the blood money. I signaled to the agents. She slumped her legs, giving out. They had to carry her to the second vehicle. What about Leo? She screamed as the door closed. What about my son? I didn't answer her. I had already handled it. Vince had called Child Protective Services an hour ago. The boy was safe. He was innocent. He would be placed with a good family far away from this toxicity. Maybe in time I would set up a trust for him. An anonymous one. Because no child should pay for the sins of their parents. But I would never see him again. He looked too much like his father. The convoy of police vehicles began to move. The sirens wailed, echoing off the canyon walls, a mournful song for a tragedy that was finally ending. I watched the taillights disappear around the bend of the mountain road, fading into the darkness until there was nothing left but the silence of the snow. I was alone. I turned back to the villa. The front door was still open, broken off its hinges by the battering ram. The lights inside were blazing, casting long shadows across the snow. It looked like a mouth gaping open in a silent scream. Blackwood walked up beside me. He held a clipboard. The police have finished the initial sweep, Douglas, he said quietly. They have the hard drives. They have the physical evidence. The house is released back to you. I looked at the structure, timber and stone, glass and steel. I had drawn the sketches on a napkin 5 years ago. I had picked out the granite for the countertops with Sarah. I had imagined grandchildren running through the halls. Now it was just a building, a container for bad memories. What do you want to do with it? Blackwood asked. Do you want to sell it? The market in Aspen is hot. We could get 20 million for it easy. I shook my head. I didn't want the money. I didn't want anyone else to live in the ghost of my daughter's life. I didn't want some hedge fund manager to buy it and brag about the view, never knowing that a woman was murdered on that balcony. Sell it, I said, but not on the market. Blackwood looked confused. Then how liquidate it, I said. Sell the furniture, sell the art, sell the fixtures, strip it down to the studs, and then sell the land to the state for a nature preserve. And the money, Blackwood asked. Donate it, I said, all of it. Start a fund for victims of domestic violence, and fund a research grant for nonprofit biotech. Make sure the Gen X patent goes public domain. Sarah wanted to save the world. Let's help her do it. Blackwood nodded. He made a note on his clipboard. He didn't argue. He knew better. It will be done, he said. I walked up the steps one last time. I entered the foyer. It was cold now. The heat had escaped through the open door. I walked through the living room, stepping over the shattered remains of the coffee table Brandon had broken in his panic. I went to the fireplace. The portrait of Sarah was still there, untouched by the chaos. I reached up and took it down. It was heavy. The frame was solid gold leaf. I held it under my arm. It was the only thing I was taking. I walked out of the house. I didn't turn off the lights. Let them burn. Let them burn until the bulbs died. I walked down to the waiting car where my driver was standing, holding the door open. Are you ready to go, sir? He asked. I looked up at the night sky. The storm had passed completely. The air was still. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, sharp oxygen. For 2 years, I had felt like I was suffocating. I had felt a weight on my chest that made every breath a struggle. Now the weight was gone. I wasn't happy. Happiness was a luxury I had lost when I buried my child. But I was clean. I was balanced. The scales of the universe, which had been tipped so violently against my family, were finally level. I looked at the hard drive in my pocket, the evidence that had brought down a monster. I thought about the look on Brandon's face when he realized he owned nothing. It wasn't revenge, I told myself. It was an audit. And the account was closed. I got into the car. I placed the portrait of Sarah on the seat next to me. Let's go home, I said. The driver nodded and pulled away. We drove down the winding mountain road, leaving the glowing villa behind us. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I looked forward into the darkness that the headlights were cutting through. The road ahead was long. I was 72 years old. I was alone. But I had work to do. I had a company to rebuild. I had a legacy to secure. And I had a promise to keep to the woman in the painting beside me. She had said that we build our legacy by what we leave behind. I was going to leave behind a world where men like Brandon Cole didn't win. I was going to leave behind a truth that couldn't be buried in the snow. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the road lull me into a state of rest. For the first time in 2 years, the nightmares didn't come. There was only silence. And in the silence I found peace. Standing in the silence of my reclaimed life, I realized that the true measure of a man isn't the empire he builds, but the lengths he will go to protect those he loves. Brandon believed that wealth could bury his sins, that power could rewrite the truth. He was wrong. Evil may thrive in the shadows for a season, but it cannot survive the blinding light of justice. I learned that while we cannot bring back the dead, we can ensure their voices are heard. Peace isn't found in revenge. It is found in finally closing the account. If you believe justice was served today, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the truth always wins.